Audio check, audio check. Podium check, podium check, 1, 2, 3, 4. Podium check, 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, a couple of announcements this evening. Mr. Rizzo is joining us on the Zoom. Is Mr. Rizzo with us? Okay, thank you. My comments this evening, I would like to be a little bit more brief, as I have been lengthy several weeks in a row. I would like to welcome all in attendance and all on the Zoom, and again, remind everyone to please be respectful of your neighbor. With masks properly worn by all in attendance, we will hold this meeting tonight in an orderly fashion. The Springford School Board believes the community has the right to bring before the board issues and concerns community members may have about items on the agenda or about items in general which impact the district or affect our children. Because of this belief and philosophy, the board will open an opportunity for community members to share their concerns with the board. At the beginning of each board meeting, Springford residents will have an opportunity to share concerns and comment on agenda items only. Each community member will have up to 3 minutes to address the board. Prior to adjournment, there will be an additional opportunity for Springford residents to comment publicly. Again, each speaker will have up to 3 minutes in which to make a comment to the board. I'm going to go right through that there. Please note, as in past meetings, I will do my best to balance comments from those in person and from those on the Zoom. Remember, when you're on the Zoom, you need to raise your hand, you need to unmute yourself. You'll have that directive from our tech department there. All speakers are required to state their full name and address before making any comments. In this way, the information can be recorded for the meeting minutes. This meeting is being filmed to be broadcast on community cable channels and online. Individuals intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. The board will do all it possibly can to assure each member of the community an opportunity to speak on issues. However, if a large group wants to discuss the specific topic, the board does reserve for itself the right to limit participation and total time allocated to this part of the agenda. Once the public comment on agenda items is complete, only board members will have an opportunity to speak on issues. However, the chair may, at its discretion, permit discussion on selected items and as the need arises. Finally, I respectfully again ask that those individuals in attendance this evening are respectful, courteous, and civil during public comment and throughout the meeting, and with masks remaining properly worn throughout the meeting as well. So with those comments, do we have anything from our student reps this evening?
There are no announcements this evening.
Okay, thank you. And we do not have any presentations this evening, so we'll move right into public to be heard on agenda items only. Anyone in the room?
Stacy Salazzo, 44 Woodley Drive, Royersford. I just wanted to see if there was any follow-up from last week's discussion regarding the PACE survey and if there's been any clarification around the opt-in and consent process. Some of these questions could carry a trigger warning if a student already is struggling. The survey could have devastating consequences to them. A survey is not a compassionate way to deal with a serious crisis in a young person's life. The survey is anonymous, but very personal in nature. And I just want to know, since you're selling our children's data, would you be able to cite the specific programs you have in place already that need that $40,000 about you said last week in funding? Because if I do it right, it's about your total budget is $180 million. It's about what, 0.02% of that. I mean, instead of trying to opening a can of worms and asking very personal questions to these kids that maybe they don't even know what half these things are. Maybe you can find the money somewhere else. Are these programs already in place? Do you need this funding yearly? I mean, maybe it's something to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments in the room? On Zoom? Go ahead, Rich.
Hello, Kay Della. You may now make public comment. Please unmute yourself, state your full name and address.
Okay, we'll go on to the next. Are there any others? Okay, thank you. So now we're going to move into board and committee reports. Legislative, Christina Melton, you did refer to Maggie, right?
Yeah, and there was no meeting last week.
There was no meeting. Okay. MCIU, Mr. DeBello?
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the meeting. I'm waiting for the minutes to come out and I'll forward to the board.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rizzo, if you're with us on the Zoom, do you have any report for us this evening?
I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Sorry I'm not able to be there in person with you. Just a couple of things. First, I did want to talk about the pay survey very briefly to answer the question. So a few things come out of the pay survey and not participating in it. And part of that is the funding that we mentioned last week. Part of that is reduced funds for PCCD grants, which we apply for annually. And then it's the data that we use to provide programs. We do provide programs to our students, K-8. We do life skills programming and some other things. So we do want to keep the survey in place. We did decide in talking with Mr. Fitzgerald that the best option for us was to do an opt-in instead of an opt-out. I do have some reservations about that, but I understand the reasoning behind that. I just worry about not collecting enough data to be able to use that information. But having said that, he did say that opting in seemed to be the best option. So that's on the pay survey. The next thing I wanted to bring up is we have motions on the agenda this evening to appoint 2 assistant superintendents as per the presentation from last week. I first want to thank the board for identifying the need to support our students with special needs through this added position. As we went through the initial interview process, we found 2 strong candidates, both who are highly specialized in their areas of special education and of curriculum instruction. I believe Dr. Kelly Murray and Dr. Tina Giambaptista's skill sets complement each other together, and I expect they will make a remarkable difference here at Springford. The Assistant Superintendent of Teaching, Learning, and Innovation will oversee professional development, direct the district's curriculum and development needs, and develop long-range plans for professional personnel needs as well. No stranger to Springford, Dr. Kelly Murray, the proposed Assistant Superintendent of Teaching, Learning, and Innovation, has served as the Director of Curriculum for Springford Area School District since September of 2019. In her previous roles, she served as an Assistant Director of Teaching and Learning, Director of STEM, Supervisor of Instruction, Elementary Building Administrator, Curriculum Coordinator, and Biology and Life Science Teacher. Dr. Murray has her doctoral degree in Education Leadership from Immaculata University and earned her letter of eligibility in 2012. Responsibilities of the Assistant Superintendent of Special Education and Student Services will supervise the Special Education Department in the implementation of special education programming, overseeing school counseling and school psychologist personnel, and acting as an advocate for our students to increase inclusive practices. Dr. Tina Giambattista, the proposed acting superintendent of special education and student services, began her career as a gifted support teacher in 1994 at North Penn. Over the next several years, she taught special education, servicing students with learning disabilities and autism. Dr. Giambattista then became an administrator in North Penn and Wissahickon School Districts, where she served in a variety of leadership roles within the special education department. Currently, Dr. Giambattista is a special education supervisor in the Central Bucks School District at the secondary level. Dr. Giambattista earned her doctorate in educational leadership from Gwynedd Mercy University in 2017, and her superintendent letter of eligibility from Delaware Valley University in 2021. And again, I thank the board for the support as we move into this next phase here at Springford to support our students in a much more robust way. That's my report.
Mr. Rizzo, are there any questions from anyone for Mr. Rizzo?
Yes, Mr. Rizzo, you mentioned that the solicitor said the best reason was to opt in. Mr. Solicitor, maybe you can answer that question. Why opt in?
Well, let's clarify what I had suggested. So it is my view that there should be a written consent in order to participate. And this stems from my reading of the language in Chapter 4 of the PA Code. And as I see it, the entity who is seeking to have this survey completed as a third party. They are not an educational entity. If we were affiliated with it, or it was done by another educational entity, as I typically would define them, then we could use the approach that had been occurring.
Thank you.
I would like to continue that discussion a little bit. And I'm just a little bit concerned about the integrity of the data, the amount of data, as Mr. Rizzo had said, that we would get if we changed from the opt-out to the opt-in. So the Pennsylvania school code that is referred to is the right to have their children excluded from research, studies, or surveys conducted by entities other than a school entity unless prior written consent has been obtained. This survey, which has been conducted since 1989, every other year on 6th, 9th, 10th, and 12th graders, is a partnership with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, the Pennsylvania Department of Drug and Alcohol Program, and the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. The information that is gathered through this data that has these surveys that have been collected on over 280,000 students across 1,144 schools in school districts and non-traditional schools, in county reports of 7 counties, is valuable data that we find the trends in drug, alcohol, juvenile delinquency, mental health, and specifically, this information, that this data that's gathered, it's then given back to the district. We receive information at the district level, the county level, and the state level to see where the trends are with violence and drug and mental health issues. This data can then be used by our administrators to do grant writing. That grant writing can bring in sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant money that can be used for programs for our students. We have talked a lot about mental health issues. That's been a big topic over the past couple of years of our students, a significant concern of everyone. And this information is a foundation. It's like a bedrock that we can build upon to address those needs. We really can't go into to this kind of data surveying with our students on our own, individually. The counselors work really hard to get information about students that are at risk with mental health and drug, but this is totally anonymous. Students don't have to answer every question. The students can skip over information. It's paper and pencil. There's no an indication at all that this information can tie back to the students. So as I said, my concern is that this data will not be valid data if we did an opt-in as opposed to an opt-out. So that's just my opinion on it. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
I do agree with you, Dr. Wright, that I think that we could be handicapping ourselves or at a loss if we do not have enough participation, where we would lose funding for, things that are happening that we're maybe not even aware of because we don't have that information. However, I know that Mr. Fitzgerald also had said this week that if it was not research-based, that was another piece that came up, that possibly we could go with the opt-out piece. But if it's data and it's research, it seems to me that it clearly is, that's what it's all about. Is that right? I mean,
Yeah, Maggie, with the understanding of the upside of the survey, I wanted to see if there were ways to essentially stress test that language for one of those arguments. And from my review and looking at what is on the Pennsylvania Commission on Crimes and Delinquency website, the PAYS information that was shared with me, I do think that there is an inherent research component to what they're doing. And, if they aligned with the IUs to do this survey statewide, I think then that would be an end around that language. They just simply don't have a school entity that's a part of the overall process. The language is what it is.
and there's no way to say, because I think we talked briefly about this also, there's no way to say if you don't opt out, or that we're assuming you're opting in. There's no way to be creative with that, to be able to get the percentage of results or the body of results that we want to be able to lend itself towards supporting additional funding for these issues? Is there any way to
Well,
correct
listen,
that line?
at a minimum, what the board is being asked to do this evening is just approve moving forward with the survey. I've looked at the language that would suggest we have to do the written consent. And I think that's what you would be acting on this evening. If there are ways to help in balance both the needs of individuals who have concern about the written consent, but also the efficacy of the survey itself, we certainly will be striving for that.
Okay, thank you.
I don't believe it's a balance. The language is the language. Is it opt in or opt out? I mean, that's.
Right.
It
And
comes back to
I,
that. It's
and
a
I,
simple question.
it is, it's not, we have to have written consent.
Right. So then that's what we need to follow.
Correct.
I'm not against the survey, but we need to follow the language.
I think it should be, I mean, our operating practice should be to follow the language and policies and procedures and laws, right? Not having a discussion as to whether or not we should or shouldn't. And when I get very clear direction from council, it makes me very comfortable that we're doing the right thing.
Any other comments for Mr. Rizzo? Okay, thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Mr. Fitzgerald, do you have a report this evening?
I do not have a report this evening.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to the minutes, A and B. Is there a motion? Second. Questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Moving on to personnel, A through N.
Separate out. L. You said personnel? We broke it out, but separate G, H, K. M and N.
For all others, G through H, or G, H, M, N, K, and L. We're going to separate those for all others in personnel. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second. Questions or comments on those? Do you have a question or comment beyond G, H, M, N, K, or L?
Yes, item 2.
Okay.
I'm not sure who to direct this to. So we have a nurse that is resigning. How many nurses do we currently have now? Because I've seen this a couple of times.
Which item is this, Mr. Jackson?
We currently have 8 certified school nurses and 8 RNs. One is resigning.
Yes, Ms. Lees, I'm talking about total overall for the district.
So it will be approximately 16. Again, we have a resignation and we're looking to refill another CSN position due to a resignation earlier this year. We have 2 vacancies currently.
So a total of 16 currently.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, so we're still separating G, H, M, N, K, and L. We have a first and a second, I believe. All in favor of the others, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so those carry. So then if we go back to G and H. You want to take those together? Well, G, H, M, and N are very similar for Dr. Murray and Dr. Gian Batista. we can take those. Is there a motion for G and H, M and N?
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments on those?
My comment here is, as I can appreciate Mr. Rizzo's presentation of the restructuring that I initially supported did not come with a cost. So that is my position regarding GH, K, M, and N.
I think we were all aware of the cost. I definitely had heard that. I believe we had that discussion. Yes, we did.
The initial proposal did not include cost.
We met in executive session, and I want to say that that was an item that we discussed at length.
And I'm not saying you're incorrect. I'm saying that the motion, the proposal I submitted, I supported, which was the initial proposal, did not have a cost of $230,000 associated with it.
And any other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of G, H, M, and N, say aye. Any opposed?
No,
So, Mrs. Burkert, I'm probably not saying Bickert, sorry. It was an 8-1 vote. Are you clear? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, then we're going to take K.
So move.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, that motion carries. And then L.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments?
What are the clubs? What clubs would these be? Do you happen to, Mr. Schaefer, do you know as from extracurricular? Because it was not presented at extracurricular, so I'm just curious what.
It was actually, not the last meeting, but
Two-
it was prior to, do you remember? And I'm
Two
sure,
meetings
I
ago.
was afraid you were gonna ask. It was really good. That doesn't help. I believe it had to do with STEM. Come on, you were there. We need charades. I doubt, do you remember, Bob?
Mr. Rizzo,
I
you
do.
have it?
So yeah, it's robotics and coding. It's intended to be an after-school extension of what we're doing with RamQuest for students. The two contracts or the two positions are for the fall and the spring as a pilot at Brook Elementary. And then we had talked about after that first semester, if we found it to be successful, then we would come back in the spring, possibly, and expand that to all of our elementary schools.
Great,
All right,
thank you.
So I don't remember, Mr. Schaefer, you giving an update on this, so I might have missed it, but if we're piloting, I don't know why we just didn't say what the two clubs were that we're putting in place, first off. Second off, what's the cost associated to them? Because is SFEA going to fund those clubs after the first semester, or is this something that the district's going to pick up later, or what's the long-term plan?
So the cost is as per the normal CBA language, $402 per contract to meet X amount of times throughout the fall, and then again X in the spring, picked up by the school district at this point. And that's kind of the extent of where we got, just as a pilot to see what we thought.
All right, any further questions?
Wait a minute, I might have read this wrong. We're funding and not, I'm sorry, I read this wrong. Right, we're adding 2 new clubs. Right, I got it. But quick other question, did this go through the normal process of adding clubs? Or are these 2 that we like, so we're just adding them?
It went to the extracurricular committee meeting. We talked about it. Dr. Moyer and Mr. Laurie came and did the presentation, and that was I think it was either May or June that happened. And then it was recommended to move it forward to the board. It just didn't happen. We didn't get it done in June. That's why we're bringing it forward now.
But that's not what I'm asking.
Sorry.
There's a process for adding clubs. The process is where there's usually student participation. They write it up, it's presented, they get feedback from other students. It's a whole written process for adding clubs. Because the reason why we have that in place is because, and again, I think these are great clubs, but we have a process to follow.
So just speaking on behalf of extracurricular, there was a presentation that was very well done. It's been a couple of months since, so forgive me for the not sharp recollection. We're talking about $804. I know, but there was a presentation. I'm happy to find it in the notes and get this is a pilot. It's worded specifically, so it's just to try it out. Then I think we would have more information to be able to move forward with whether or not we add to our general budget and add a club, or whether or not we could swap out the club. So respecting whatever process has been around, that's what we've done so far.
And this is at the elementary school level. So in terms of the process, I think, Mr. DeBello, that you're referring to tends to be more at the intermediate and high school levels. Certainly, but this program is an extension of what already exists that has really been very well received at the elementary level. But I do believe, Mr. Rizzo, if you can remind me, I believe that there had been, whether it was a summer program or they had done some, a few after-school events. And so there was a good amount of interest that had already been expressed by students and families. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. I know that Mr. Laurie is on the call. If you can promote him to a panelist, I'm sure that he'd be willing to weigh in a little bit on that. I know this is kind of one of the things that he really worked hard on.
Right, are there any follow-up questions or further comments
No,
to
I'm
that
just-
discussion?
The only thing I'm going to say is that please, as we move forward, if we're going to add clubs, we'll make sure that we're following the process that's established.
Send me the process and we'll follow it.
They have it.
They have it? Okay.
Okay, all in favor of L, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. So we finished with personnel there. We'll move to finance, A through M. Is there a first?
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments on A through M? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Programming and curriculum, A through E. Separate A. So we're at B through E. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments on B through E? All in
We-
favor, say, oh, is there somebody?
We have a proposed cost of $25,000 for 125 courses for 90 kids in need. What is there an itemized cost per student? So if we go to 95 kids or 100 kids, we've got money to cover that cost?
What number are you referencing?
E, since this was already approved by the well-established ESSA grants.
Did this already occur? It says the approval.
It already happened. It was a summer school.
Oh, I thought this is this summer. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, why are we approving this in October?
Mr. Rizzo or?
Oh,
Mr.
yep.
Does anyone have a response to that at all?
I can't tell if anybody's coming up to the podium. I would just simply say that as we went through and looked at all of our summer programming and our ESSER funding, we realized this did not get on the agenda as we had hoped. So that's why we're getting it on after the fact.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so B through E, we have a first, a second. Questions, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so motion carries for B through E. Back to A. Is there a motion?
Move.
And a second?
Second.
Questions or comments further?
Just a quick question, Mr. Fitzgerald, does this motion need to be changed slightly to state that it will require an opt-in process or anything like that, or? I just want to
No.
make sure that it's,
It does not.
okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that motion carries also. Conferences and workshops, A through E.
Separate B and C again.
So A, D, and E. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments?
So I spoke about this last week.
We're not on B and C yet. We're still A, D, and E. A, D, and E. I don't want to scream into the mic, but it's A, D, and E that we're on right now. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? A, D, and E carried. B and C, yes, Mr. Jackson, you asked about that. I did as well. Do we have a motion for B and C?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Now, Mr. Jackson, your comment.
Same question. I'm curious, so why we're sending two people to the same conference? Where one person can't go, one person can go, and as I gave a simple example last week. I sent an engineer to a conference, he or she takes the information, comes back, shares it with the colleagues. I don't understand why we're sending two people to the same conference.
So the other part of that, Mr. Jackson, is that there are a lot of breakout sessions and it allows them to get a little deeper and share out when they come back. I did not share it with you last week. That was new information we found out this week.
I think it's good though, Mr. Jackson, that you raised it so that we are conscious of that. But I would agree with Mr. Rizzo from what I've heard, that there are a number of breakout sessions that one person wouldn't be able to attend all and bring that information back. Are there any other comments or questions on B and C? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
So Mrs. Bickert, 8-1. You have that? Okay. Other business, A and B. Is there a motion?
Separate A just for,
Separate B.
Okay. Okay, we've separated
Wait a
on
minute, I
every
need to lay
single
down.
agenda item tonight.
to
Let's
figure that-
take
That
A.
was a good one.
Okay,
So moved.
and is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments on A?
so my question is, I'm just curious, I believe I understand, been around here enough. I'm just curious why it's not clear who is paying the 1,900 in the motion. So I understand that it's stated very clearly that the software program and staff are going to conduct fundraising events, but I mean, it doesn't say, is the district paying this or is the individual student athlete and their family paying it? That's all. That's just I'd like at least a minor discussion so that we understand who's paying for it.
That's correct. I think Mr. McDaniel did clarify that for us. I don't see him in the audience this evening, but Mr. Rizzo, did you want to elaborate further on that? And
Sure.
yes, I-
Yeah.
we correct it going forward, but I think traditionally that's how it's been. Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, those types of trips have past practice has been that the students fundraise and then they pay out of pocket for the difference. So the only expense of the district is the substitutes, which is 3 subs for 3 days or 9 total sub costs. We can work on writing up the motion to be a little bit more clear in the future.
That would be my request. Yeah, I've actually paid for one of these. So yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right, all in favor of A?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Then B, is there a motion for new other business B?
So moved.
And a second? Questions or comments on B?
Could, The administration just give some background here. Is this a first grader, sixth grader, 12th grader? Will it be more than 1 year? Just look curious. There's any
Okay.
background?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this one kind of fell into our laps in the last week. This is added from the previous agenda. We were approached by an agency that had this student in another district, and the housing and placement fell through. So she was here in the States without a place to go. So the agency reached out to Dr. Collier. This is a high school student. I believe 12th grade. I'm not 100% sure if Dr. Collier is in the audience. Maybe you can speak to that, but it's 11th and 12th grade. And she's already in, and she would be prepared to start with us. She's not with us right now. She's currently in a holding pattern until the board sees fit to approve this.
That's enough.
And is she with a district family?
Not currently, but if you approve it, she will be, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments on B? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Now we'll move into board comments, and I would like to start by officially welcoming Dr. Murray into her new role and Dr. Jean Batista into your new role here at Springford. We are looking forward to great things, and we're very happy to have you both. So thank you. Also, a couple of other just housekeeping items for the board that I wanted to share is that I have, after Mr. Jackson's comments last week and some others, I have asked Mr. Rizzo to confirm, and I think he's going to work on that with an EDI presentation at the October work session. So we'll get an update then. I will also be sending out an invitation and talking to Mrs. Pickard about scheduling our next President's Council meeting to take place in October, where we will coordinate with the outside groups that support our students in so many ways here at Springford. I'll also let you know that the school board presidents meetings have continued and resumed also since August. We are meeting virtually the second Wednesday of each month. And I will remind everyone that the homecoming parade is back. And I've been a huge advocate and of getting a trailer for us all to ride together through Royersford. So I just want to throw it out there that I am working on that. So everybody gear up and get ready for the homecoming parade coming up soon.
I'm already
That's my
committed.
I'm sorry.
I'm already committed to another float, so apologize. And my answer would be the same if you needed help moving.
We'll revisit that. Those are all of my comments. Anyone else have a board comment this evening?
Madam President, you mentioned the EDI. Does that tie into the memo we received, or is it different? Your comments.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's my comment about is that just that I asked.
Clinton, speak up. No, turn the mic on.
Thank you, guys. We talked about the memo reference and meeting with parents, meeting with kids. Next Tuesday and Wednesday is October 5th and 6th. So something's going to go out to the community between tonight and tomorrow or in the week?
I'm not
And
exactly
how are we
sure how.
selecting? How are we
right.
selecting parents? How are we selecting kids?
Well, that would be a question for Mr. Rizzo, Mrs. Lees, that, yes, I understand October 5th and 6th, and there will be community input, involvement, and all of that as well. What I was referencing was that we discussed last week, how would we continue with the EDI committee with Mr. Wiley, and we talked about that group of 28, that we would have some representation come to a board meeting and give us an update. So I asked Mr. Rizzo to see if that would be possible for the October work session. And I hope that it will be, especially in light of what's happening earlier that month, next week, with the growth or the outreach of EDI. Mrs. Lees, did you want to comment further on what's happening next week?
Certainly. So last Tuesday, we had a Zoom meeting with Mr. Wiley. confirming his visit to the district on October 5th and 6th. He will be visiting all of our buildings, basically going around on walking tours of the buildings, just getting to know Springford. He'll have the opportunity to speak with some of our staff during staff meetings. He'll have the opportunity to interact with parents. Certain parents have reached out to us indicating that they'd be interested in getting on a parent committee. We are convening a small group of individuals just to get a sense of what that would look like. We're still working out the final details for Mr. Wiley's agenda, but we are working on making sure that we're getting representatives from across the district. And again, finalizing the agenda. Once it's finalized, a copy of that will be in the board memo as well this week.
Thank you.
I thought input from the district was part of the 28. I'm assuming they're from all the buildings.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question
The
completely.
28 people that we currently have, don't they represent, there's a representative from each building? I would think.
Sorry, there's not representatives from every single building. There are multiple representatives from the high school, some of the elementary schools, but not every building sent a representative. The purpose of Mr. Wiley's visit, again, is to get a feel for the school district and have him go out just to visit the buildings and again, do tours of the areas.
Okay for now, okay.
All right, any other board comment this evening?
I just have a couple. First, I agree with Colleen. It's great to have, Dr. Murray moving forward into the assistant superintendent role, as well as our new, and I'm not even going to try to attempt your last name, joining us as well. I mean, this was, our special education has been growing over the last several years. And we definitely know and realize that it was time to add new leadership or additional leadership into the role. And so I look forward to how is it? Gina Bautista joining us, sorry. But I think you're going to be a welcome addition to the district. I think you're going to do awesome. And I think that there's several areas that we definitely going to need your expertise and knowledge to as we build out our future special education department, our resources and all the programs and initiatives that we have underway. And I'm also excited to have you come on right as we're forming the parent advisory group with special education. I think that you'll play a very active role in setting that up. I know a lot of parents are really excited to be involved and part of that. They like to provide input and really, so I think when they see this and you're joining us, I think that there's going to be a lot of excitement in that community as well. So thank you for coming on board. Last week, I asked Mr. Rizzo several questions regarding the mask order, the contact tracing, quarantining. And, Colleen, I believe you asked a few questions as well. As elected officials, we have our opinions and we have our feelings and when we vote and all that, but we also represent a community at large. And there's a large group of parents that are still very concerned on, back in mid-August, we had a board meeting. This board voted to follow and the recommendations put forward by the CDC. So that was our motion. We did that. When we did that, it created a lot of turmoil within the district. A week later, Mr. Rizzo put forward what he hoped to have calmed the waters as we start the new school year and put forward a plan that had dates specific. If certain things happen, we'll do this. If other things happen, we'll do that. So it was well laid out. And as within a few days of starting that plan, the state dropped an order on us. We always agreed that we're going to follow the state order as presented. There still seems to be a lot of questions about, are we following part of the state order? Are we following, what PDE says, their interpretation of the order, are we following Springford's health and safety plan? It's a community that's upset. They have concerns because they feel, and as a board, we said that we would follow any order put forward or mandate put forward by the state. And an order was put forward, and then we're kind of following it, but then we also either follow part of our health and safety plan, or we follow PDE's interpretation or addition to the state order, but it's not really official because I can't find anywhere where it's actually an addition to the state order. And then when I questioned or asked about, or Colleen, actually, I don't want to question about contact tracing. And through the conversation, again, it was stated that contact tracing is recommended by Montgomery County. In lieu of something better, we should follow Montgomery County's contact tracing. When I went through and looked at, a lot of the documents that are put together, there doesn't seem to have anything mandated that we need to follow Montgomery County's contact tracing. So in lieu of nothing better, if we created our own contact tracing, would that supersede what Montgomery County is recommending? Because we also have another problem that I recently found out, that there was contact tracing of a student that happens to live in Spring City, which is in Chester County. Chester County's contact tracing is different than Montgomery County's contact tracing. So now we're imposing two different kinds of contact tracings based on what side of the bridge you live on in the school district. And when I mean bridge, there's literally a bridge. So I don't want to make it look like, and when you talk about Chester County's contact tracing, they bring in and they talk about also if you do test it with the antibodies or you had COVID, then you're treated differently than if you're vaccinated versus if you're not vaccinated. When you actually read the letter that Chester County has, it's pretty long and pretty extensive. And actually, if you don't follow it by word, very closely, it's somewhat confusing. So we're kind of like in this situation where we have Montgomery County's contact tracing, which now, from what we understand, it's really not an order. It's recommended that we follow the contact tracing. And then we have Chester County, again, is recommended to follow, right? And we only have one school in Chester County, so that's different than what we're doing. So we're kind of like all over the place with everything that we're doing. And I understand exactly where the parents are coming from. We also have a situation where, not that this is any fault of anyone sitting at this table, but most doctors now have taken upon themselves that they won't sign anything because of whatever reasons. So it just goes on and on and on. And then we have school districts in Montgomery County. Some school districts are doing one thing, other school districts are doing something else. So it's just kind of like all over the place. I represent a community, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. And, I sat here and I said that I will follow what's mandated by the state. And at this point, I'm actually to the point where I don't believe we're actually following what's mandated or ordered by the state. We're kind of hodgepodge of what the state's saying and what Springford is interpreting through PDE's additions to what's brought forward by the. So from I'm one board member, but I think that we need to follow the state order as written. And if they change it, then they change it. If they do away with it, then we revert back to our health and safety plan. But as of is right now, the only thing that's on the table that's mandated or ordered is a state order that's very well, no, I shouldn't say very well written because there's holes all over it. But there is a lot of questions related to that. And I think that as a board, we need to visit the whole contact tracing, because if it's a recommendation through Montgomery County and we could create our own contact tracing, and maybe we take what's working in Chester, Monco, and Bucks County, which I believe Bucks County is not doing any contact tracing anymore. But there's just a lot of questions, there's a lot of concerns, there's a lot of theories, there's a lot of interpretations. There's just a lot of everything. And the only thing that we know for sure is there's a state order that's written by the Department of Health, or, which we're required to follow.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of questions, but it's always been an evolving, moving target that we've had to keep up with. But I'm just don't understand what you are specifically requesting we do at this point. That's what I would like to hear.
I'm specifically requesting that we follow the state order as written.
But we're already doing that.
We're not going to have chatter from the audience.
So specifically, what are you saying then? What do you want to change? That's what I'm missing from this whole long speech.
The state order, all I'm talking about changing is following the state order as written.
But you're saying we're not doing so. It's specifically how would you like to change?
There are things that we're requiring in Springford that's not in the state order.
So I think when we get to it, we're talking about the medical excuse, that it's not specifically written into the state order, which purposefully or mistakenly is poorly written in my eyes. I've read it, I've reread it. Unfortunately, I've read it too many times. Bottom line, though, is that supplemental information did come out for those school districts, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fitzgerald, did come out for those school districts that wanted to find a loophole or somehow skate around it. And so supplemental guidance was distributed or was disseminated among us. And yeah, that is what I believe to be true. So with that in mind, I think it's hard that if the liability is going to fall on us as volunteer school board members, elected officials, what have you, all of that. My concern is that the physicians that are treating these kids that supposedly have these medical conditions and very may well, they should be the ones taking on the liability to sign off on the no masking. I have no problem, but if a doctor does that, my issue is, I don't think that that's what we're supposed to be taking on per the order and per the supplemental information that came out after that. Is that correct, Mr. Fitzgerald, or am I off?
It was a compound question. So
That is true.
I'll riff, I suppose, a little bit. I said from the beginning, I will say it again tonight, you are following the order. You are following the order, in my opinion, based on how I interpreted it before the guidance from PDE came out. This is a district that in August of 2020 put a medical form in place, produced or developed by the nurses within the district, and utilized that process, not because of this order, but has been in practice since August 2020. It was likely the form you were going to use even under your current health and safety plan. But if you look at the order, and Tom aptly pointed it out, I said it again as well last week, it is poorly written. So one can glean in some respects what they want from the order. But the order clearly allows for what the district is doing as relates to medical documentation. And I would go so far as to say that Section 4 of the order, which is kind of the critical area, there's a provision in there that has been referred by a number of individuals that note, I suppose a district is to provide reasonable accommodations for individuals who, quote, state they have a medical condition, indicating that the mere statement would then trigger responsibility under the order. And I understand where that interpretation may come from, but I don't agree with that interpretation. You have to understand there's a couple of things within that provision that are striking. One is they use the term individual. An individual may state something. Well, who is the individual? Is the individual a student? Is the individual a staff member? Is the individual somebody who shows up at the school board meeting tonight? And what is a reasonable accommodation? Does it mean that they don't have to wear a mask? These are things that are undefined in this wonderful order by the Department of Health. So when a district puts a plan in place, whether it be the 504 process, whether it be requiring some level of documentation from a medical provider, then the district is adhering to prong 1 of this order, which says require and enforce the requirements that all teachers, children, students, staff, and visitors wear a face covering indoors, regardless of whether this order is reflected in a school entity's health and safety plan. So yes, this board is following the order.
Thank you.
The medical form that you're referring to, when that was developed under different conditions and it was never brought forward to this board for approval as well. So I understand what you're saying. And I could also say the same thing where our health and safety plan that was in place, then we could actually revert back to the health.
Oh,
We could actually follow our health and, based on what you just said, we could follow our own health and safety plan. I mean, but no, but you understand.
I get what you're saying.
That's the problem with the order is this is a situation, and like I said, I represent, people, and I'm bringing forward where they're at, and in a lot of instances, I have to agree with.
I
with
understand.
some of
I
the,
get
what they're putting forward, and
I understand that. I understand that interpretation. And is a plausible, legally plausible interpretation? It is, but it doesn't mean that the implementation that's occurring here is an incorrect interpretation. It is, in my opinion, just as viable, if not more so.
but as long as we're following the order, then we don't have a liability.
You could look at
That's
that
a-
from either perspective, though, I think is what he's saying.
What
Are there
he's
5
saying,
people?
no, let me finish. He's saying that we're following the order. So what I'm saying is as long as we're following, listen to the words. So as long
I'm
as,
listening.
so as long as we're following the order, you're saying that we don't have a liability, right?
Not necessarily. No, I
Right.
can't say
I
that.
just
I
wanna-
can't say that.
I
No.
know that. I know you can't.
Because I
but
think there's,
wanted to-
yeah, I mean, if I could give you all a clean bill of
No,
health
you
on
can't.
liability.
Right.
I don't think
Right.
there's a practitioner that could do that in our current world. Do I think, and I've said this to this group before, is liability a gray area, nebulous when it comes to COVID? Absolutely. But that is why how you are implementing the order, I think positions you in the best possible situation.
Well, and I appreciate, and I've always supported your recommendation, but in this instance, I feel that I will state that I feel that the order needs to be followed exactly as written. That's my position.
Is there anyone else that wants to comment? Or are there 5 people that want to continue this conversation? Okay, well then we're going to move on to any other board comment this evening.
Yeah, I have an additional comment. I have to agree with Mr. Jackson when we're talking about Mr. Wiley coming next week. Again, it sounds like this was kind of thrown together. I still want to know what's the purpose? Why is he coming? Why is he walking around the buildings? He wants to get familiar with Springford. For what purpose? He was supposed to be a consultant to the group of 28. The 28 people were supposed to be the conduit into the district. Now it's like he's becoming a conduit into the district. I'm really losing perspective on what is the actual goals of what we're trying to achieve. Because I think if you even went back and revisit when we originally put the EDI group in place, what their general purpose was, and then the directives that were given early on. And I'm still waiting for, what's the expectations? What's the deliverables? What's the, the goals, all this stuff, nothing's, and I understand that we're going to get this presented, but we're sending someone into the building. How do we know what conversations this person is going to be having with students? Who's overseeing the conversations that are having or occurring in the buildings? I mean, there's a whole slew of questions. And again, nothing has been brought forward to this board in months. Actually, we approved this consultant and then nothing has been brought to the table. And, and I know we have a policy in place, but that policy was a draft policy that was adopted that was supposed to be revisited. That still hasn't happened. So I just like we're moving forward. I talked with a couple of people on the EDI committee and they've said to me point blank, they have no idea what's even going on. They're completely confused. So it just keeps adding on and expanding off of, and I don't have anything against Mr. Wiley. I'm just trying to get all of this lined up so that, as Mr. Jackson said, the Empire State Building was built in 410 days and we're 3 years into this. And we're just, if somebody came up to me on the street and asked me, so what's up, what's the EDI doing? What's their purpose? What's their deliverables? My response is, I don't know. It's very frustrating.
Anybody else? Any other board comment this evening?
Just on that, if I may, just, I mean, is there any, like, why are we releasing a consultant into our buildings before we have an understanding as to what that consultant is doing based upon our own committee? So who runs that committee, and could they make a presentation to us and just table his visits until we have an understanding? I mean, what's the
I
what's the
feel like-
necessary rush?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I feel like we're moving into micromanagement here. We created this committee. We unanimously voted for it. It serves a real purpose that we need, meaning as a public school, one of our main jobs is to provide equitable education so that all children can meet their best potential and succeed, not equality. We don't offer equality or equality of outcome, but equitable, meaning that, and this is the whole point of this, and if we don't have a procedure, a process, an infrastructure for that, we can't do it. We need to let them work on their job and then come back and present to us. And I think we're kind of going into the micromanagement point here, and I just don't agree with it. I think.
Okay, well,
they'll
I
come back at the
appreciate
end
your
of October.
perspective, that you think this is micromanaging. I wasn't, whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, or what wallpaper we're going to pick out. I know that would be property. I don't understand why we have a consultant engaging with our staff and students when I don't understand what we're doing. And I don't need to be reminded of the importance of the subject. I'm just talking about procedurally. Why don't we understand? To me, there's exposure with the culture of our schools when we have a consultant come in to talk about what could be considered a very sensitive subject. So I appreciated Mr. DeBella's comments that I'm not quite sure what we're doing with this. And I am 100% behind it. This is a procedural question. And if you find asking procedural questions as a symbolic gesture of micromanaging, then we're going to agree to disagree.
I have a question on how we're defining this. I did not get the impression that he was going to come during his visit and actually discuss anything with the staff and the students, but more of an observation, which in his line, he may be able to pick up some things through that observation that needs to be addressed. He may not. But I see this visit as going around to the different schools, observing classrooms, teacher interaction, children interaction, the environment, and kind of summing up the environment that he's witnessing. And from that might be able to make some suggestions on the direction that he may guide us to.
Mr. Rizzo or Mrs. Lees, do you want to comment any further on Mr. Wiley's visit, the purpose of Mr. Wiley's visit next week? If you can elaborate any further on that.
Sure.
And
Yeah, I'll jump in first, and then Ms. Lisa, if you have any follow-up, you can certainly do that. But again, in the contract that we signed, there were there were several days of on-site visits, and if he's going to help us and support us and guide us, and that is the goal. The goal is for him to empower our committee to move forward and build the work to support kids. And again, it's about kids, it's all kids. He's got to know what Springford is, and to do that, he's going to have to walk through our buildings. He'll never be walking through our buildings without a staff member. He will always be with somebody. People aren't allowed to just walk through our buildings. They have to have a staff member with them at all times. So our goal, and Ms. Lisa is going to share a schedule with you at some point in our board memo. And at this point, every board memo moving forward, there will be more information. And if you like, I can provide an update at every superintendent report as we move forward as well, just to keep you as informed as possible. We started the school year. We're a month into school, and it's just taken us a while to get things up and running because we're starting a little bit differently than we had intended.
okay, thank you. I just want to go back, Mr. Rizzo, while you're still there with us, and revisit one other piece from somewhat relates to earlier discussions. But our health and safety plan that was based on metrics and a timeline, and all of that, with the first part of that would have expired on Friday. Can you talk to us? Has Nurse Smith said anything? Has there been a noticeable decrease at all? Knowing that the CHOP Policy Lab individual had said he really thought through that there would be that bump that first period of time, and then things would start to, level out. Was that true in our district or in our footprint?
So, excuse me. So that's a good question. Thank you. So as we look through, and I was able to kind of figure out how our spring forward number is calculated. It's based on the total population of Limerick, Warriors and Upper Providence communities, which is about 47,236 people. So we do that, and it's a simple proportion. So when you get that per 100,000 number, it's a simple proportion. So what we have seen over the course of the weeks is a bit of an increase up until this past week. And what we think is tomorrow we'll probably see us climb a little bit higher for the first time going into high, where we have been in substantial since school has started. So we have seen it, it just, for example, we were at 95 and then 84 and 95. So that's 5 students per, or not students, 5 community members per 47,000 students per week. So if you have an increase of 5, you're going to go up 10 in that per 100,000 number. So that's a pretty kind of leveled off. This week, we're going to see tomorrow, whenever the numbers get released from last week, we'll see an increase in the high.
Okay, thank you. Any other board comment this evening?
Yeah, I had a question actually also for Mr. Rizzo, or a comment regarding that. Mr. Rizzo, when I was looking over the data that talked about the close contact with the contact tracing, I wondered if that contact tracing can be, or the close contacts can be traced back to certain situations, like are they occurring on buses or are they occurring in the cafeteria? And if so, if your staff is able to determine that, if you are able to look closer at those situations and try and find solutions that would be able to keep students, for example, at lunch further apart, at least, and then perhaps be able to cut down on the number of students that have to be quarantined because of certain situations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So again, the definition of close contact is 6 feet for 15 minutes or more. There is an exception that if there are 2 students, and I emphasize students, that are between 3 and 6 feet and they are masked, then there's no need for them to quarantine. They would not be identified as a close contact. To your point, in the cafeterias, in all of our cafeterias, we are not able to achieve 6 feet. If we did that, we would lose instructional spaces, or we'd have to add significant lunches and alter our schedule. And we knew that going in, it wasn't going to be a possibility for us. So we have spread out as much as we can. We've tried to get beyond 3 feet for sure, just from the standpoint of just utilizing our space to the best ability possible. But again, if we're not 6 feet, if we're 5.5 feet, that doesn't change things in terms of the close contact piece. But yes, I am, we are always reevaluating what can we do. And we have a meeting with the nurses and Chief Boyer on Thursday to talk about our practices and see if there's anything that can be tweaked.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Since it was just brought up, and Mr. DeBello had made a comment, is it reasonable to see if you all can talk about what would be Springford's contact tracing policy? And if it would differ by the 2 counties that we find ourselves participating in, or ignoring one and participating in one. So have you all talked about that? Because I think that is interesting that we're following one county when, and I apologize for not catching this earlier, we're not, we don't just reside in one county as a school system.
So we talked about talking about it. So my prompt to the nurses and Chief Boyer was, if we had an opportunity to look at our contact tracing and quarantining, what would that look like for spring forward if we were not following any kind of a mandate? So that's kind of the purpose of our meeting on Thursday, to have that conversation.
Because and thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. I realize this is a lot of meetings to talk about things that aren't educating kids, but it's disruptive. And I think the last I had heard, we've had no in-school transmission. So it seems like the quarantining has disrupted more. And I'd like to, receive a closer to the ground opinion about, what would be our version of it. On a separate subject, just to clarify on the robotics club hiccup with Mr. DeBello, my statute of memory limitations is 2 months, and that was presented in May. That's a 4-month delta, brother. You know what I'm saying? I can't be remembered. So, and it was on the minutes I checked about having to, and it's a pilot. So there you go. Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to move on to public comment or public to be heard? Or
I have one
Mr.
last
Jackson?
item from Mr. Catalano. There was a reference in the Friday memo to light speed and alert. And it's still going through the vetting process. Are we looking at this because our current system isn't working, or what's the rationale behind looking at a new program?
This would be an enhancement to our current web filter to
Okay.
give us that added functionality.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to public to be heard. And we'll start in the room.
Could we say how many people on Zoom? Rich?
It would be well, Rich, do you have a number?
79.
Thank you.
There you go. You're on.
Michael Levijinsky, Royersford, PA.
We're still taking addresses at this point. Did we change that?
I don't think we changed it. Again, this is, if the board wants to modify that, the next meeting, we can do that. Or you can do it now. It's really not. Well, well, good point, Sunshine Act.
Correct.
I would think if we want to reduce it just to township, we should do that next month.
So
Michael
for
Levy.
tonight, we're using the addresses.
Okay, Michael Levijinsky, 2005 Willowwood, Royersford. Just to make sure I heard Mr. Rizzo correctly, we are asking almost 10,000 people to put a mask on because 5 people in a community of 50,000 got a positive PCR test. So in matters that are that significant, always helps to get a second opinion. So I'll give you quotes from what another solicitor has advised their school district. My opinion is that they have met the threshold because there's no requirement that says you must have a doctor's report. This is from Jeffrey Garten, who's the solicitor for both Central Bucks School District and Quakertown School District, both in Bucks County. He also says, no, the PDE FAQ that was issued by PDE is guidance. It is not legally binding. And when referring to medical documentation, he says, we can ask, but not require. And that comment was agreed to by a special education attorney from another firm. Coincidentally, these 4 districts, as I told you last week, all accept the exception form. They do not require medical documentation. They offer permission to evaluate. And if the parent refuses, there's on the form, it says right there how they covers the district's liability. Coincidentally, we've been tracking COVID cases in these districts. And there's been no discernible difference between the districts that are accepting the exception form without medical documentation and the districts that are. So if we're still deluding ourselves into thinking that this is all being done for the kids, the results don't show that. And in fact, over the last few days, the districts that do not accept the exception, their caseload has actually gone up. Not sure if that trend will continue, but that's been the case. In fact, these districts provide the entire form, provide the exception form, provide the medical sign-off, provide the IDEA waiver, liability waiver. In Bucks County alone, there's 1,100 students that have already been processed through this process of 18,000 that they educate. And cases were increasing, as Mr. Rizzo said, in Montgomery County. If you look at the numbers, they've been increasing since early August when people weren't wearing masks. And they continued to rise even when the mask mandate took place and peak and come down So it's delusional that the masks are having any impact on the spread of this virus. You have to be insane to look at the numbers and think that. That's all.
John Yanchuk, 12 Edmonds Drive, Royersford. I've been watching these meetings for a while now, and I've noticed a pattern now. The things that we don't like, the things that upset us, are the things that the board seems to have the most problems with. Tonight it was pays, EDI, and our masking or quarantining. Now, Mr. DeBello, you're the largest provocateur on the board. We can go over again how last year, when the law was clear.
I thought we said we're not gonna allow members to attack board members. Yeah.
All right, we're done. We're not going to do this.
Some members of this board,
We're not gonna do
reclaiming
this.
my time, some members of this board did not care a whit for the law last year. It's on your Facebook page. Everyone knows it. Anyway, I have several questions for the board around the PAYS survey. Again, several members of this board, many of you, have been here for many years. Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe you've been here at least all 7 years that I've been here. So I'd like to know, if you were in such gross violation of the interpretation of the law, whose failure was that? Why are we only hearing about it this year? It seems like only the icky things are the things you have a problem with. You want to pretend the bad stuff isn't happening. It's happening right here. It happened in this room. It happened when someone told one of your students to go back where they came from.
Did
It's
you hear
time
that,
to
Mr.
take your
Yamcha?
blinders off.
No. Did you hear that? Did you actually hear what happened, or are you just passing on what you were
You
told?
can ask Abby.
I'm
You can ask
asking
the
you.
student.
I'm asking you.
You can ask the student.
Did you hear it?
You can ask the
Yes or
student.
no?
Go ahead, ask Sana.
I'm asking you.
I don't need to answer it. Ask Sana.
Please let us finish the comment. I'd like to finish the comment. Please do not throw accusations, or I will ask you to sit down. Now, you've been asked nicely, you've been warned even. Please no more personal attacks or accusations, or I ask you to sit
I
down.
didn't make a
At the
personal
same
attack.
time, excuse me.
Excuse me, I didn't make a
Excuse
personal
me.
attack. I said someone in this
Okay.
room.
Your comment time is over. Please take a seat.
Have a nice
Next.
night.
Is it on? Is this, hi. Mary Jo McNamara, 187 Abbey Drive, Royersford, PA 19468. So I just wanted to say thank you to the board for being expedient through that very long agenda. I want to say a couple of things about EDI. So I have a very long background in contracting, as I think members of the board do as well, or some members of them. So contracts are pretty specific. There should be, even if it's time and materials, even if it's not, and it's fixed price, there should be some stuff in there about what this guy's doing. I don't think that comes as a surprise. I don't know, maybe we just need to revisit what was generally outlined, but certainly if the man's going to be worth, and I think it's a man, I apologize if it's not, if he's going to be worth the money that we're paying for him, he's got to get a look at our culture and what we're doing, right? I don't know if bad things are happening. I don't know if there's anything going wrong. I think somebody's got to take a walk through, make some observations. Hopefully the dude has some good background and experience that then he can share with the 28 or whatever the 28 become. And then there's some decisions that are made, right? Like, I don't think he's the be all and end all of what this district needs to do. So I don't know why the board doesn't know what the intentions are, because I think that they should. I also think that the person needs to get a look at what's happening in the district to be able to make him worthwhile to whatever we're going to do or not do. I think that's it. Thank you.
Any other comments in the room? Any comments on Zoom? Go ahead, Rich.
Kate Doyle, you may now make public comment. Please unmute yourself. State your full name and address.
My name is Kate Doyle. I live at 310 Woodland Drive in Collegeville. I wanted to request that the board continue to offer Zoom as an option for parents who want to participate virtually. Obviously, there are the COVID precautions that many parents and guardians are taking. But even in the future, it would be excellent to continue the option for more public participation and parent guardian participation who are unable to attend in person but want to participate in the board meetings to hear the conversations as well as comment during public comment. As a parent with young children, tonight my spouse is working and I would have been able to attend the meeting in person. And my children go to bed at 8:30. So the bringing them to a meeting when they have homework to complete and need to get to bed it is excellent to have this, and I appreciate the board continuing to have the Zoom meetings so that I can participate in the public comment areas. I hope that the board continues to offer the Zoom option so that the public can continue to participate. And I really appreciate the offering of this virtual option. Thank you.
Day, you may now make public comment. Please state your full name and address.
Hi, this is Lauren Day, 50. Hello. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Lauren Day, 57 Greenbrier Drive. I just have two things to ask. So I know Dr. Wright asked about spacing at lunch and what we could do to make sure our kids are further spaced apart. I did speak with Mr. Rizzo about this. And I said, I know that a lot of parents would be willing to offer, supplies or funds to, have outdoor seating, whether we do like tables and like covers with outdoor heaters, or I know parents would be willing to contribute to that. Also, last week we talked a lot about the plan for the quarantine students, like what you guys were going to do for lessons. I didn't hear anything about that tonight. If we made any movement on that. And I also want to thank you for Zoom again, too. I have young kids that go to bed early and I would not be able to be there either. So this is very helpful to be able to make public comment and participate in the meeting. Thank you.
I want to reply to part of that. No, the quarantining, the options to help those students that are quarantined was not brought up tonight because it was decided last week that would go back to curriculum, to the committee meeting. That is the process, and that is what was decided. So that is why that was not brought up for further discussion. Yeah, no, we put that on hold. But there's no conversation for doing away with Zoom for right now. We at least put that on hold till we see what continues to happen with the numbers and with the issues out there. So just rest assured. Are there any other comments on Zoom? Go ahead.
Denise Miller, please state your full name and address and unmute yourself.
Hi, Denise Miller, 160 Swamp Creek Road, Perkiomenville, PA 18074. I just wanted to ask the board to please consider moving away from some of these topics that it seems like we're perseverating on week after week after week, such as whether or not masks are needed, whether or not students need to quarantine or distancing is needed. Let's just do what's best for our students and actually spend the time on curriculum and things like EDI, which I do absolutely 100% support. I'm glad that there is a contractor coming in to provide more information for the district on changes that can occur. And I'm hoping the board can start moving in a more positive direction instead of going around in circles on things that have been mandated by the state. Thank you.
We will. We're all going to get together on that homecoming float. We're just going to talk about that further later. Thank you.
Christine, you may now make public comment. Please state your full name and address.
Chrissy Jamowski, 310 4th Avenue, Montclair. I wanted to first just thank you for the opportunity to be able to comment. Using Zoom as a tool to participate from home for many of the same reasons that other parents listed. And I also just wanted to comment to ask the board regarding the PAYS survey, Pennsylvania Youth Survey, if it's possible to keep it the parent permission as is, where it's, I guess, a passive permission. And then if parents don't want their kids to take the survey, that they could specifically opt out and not have their child take the survey. And I just say this because, similar to what Mr. Rizzo said, it is a survey that provides so much data on the school climate, on drug and alcohol use, on mental health, on so many overall health indicators for our student population, that does two things, which is give us a nice snapshot, the community, parents, administrators, all of you as a school board. It gives us a nice snapshot to see trends and changes with these different indicators based on the feedback and the data that you get from these surveys. But also it does provide a lot of data that many funders, grant funders specifically ask for. A lot of times in these grant applications, they will say, please use localized district PAYS data if possible. So I worry that if it becomes an opt-in only type of tool that's used, that it'll just get kind of lost in the mix, not even on purpose, that there won't be enough participation, that maybe you won't get as much valid data to be able to use for additional funding, and then also for program planning and curriculum choices and those types of things. So just a thought as you move forward with the PAYS implementation. Thanks.
Erica Hermans, you may now make public comment. Please unmute yourself, state your full name and address.
Hi, Erica Hermans, 204 Abbey Drive. Today, it was asked how many people were on Zoom. 79 today, 66 last week, and in the past, it's been upwards into the hundreds based on the agenda. Even if there's one person on Zoom, it should be the primary responsibility of this board to provide as many open channels to the public to speak as possible, especially when a lift is light and it requires little to no extra effort. It's obvious from last week's conversations that some folks on the board put a premium on the public attending in person. What you prefer is irrelevant. It's about what the community needs. There are 79 people on the Zoom that require flexibility, so it should be offered. And while we're on this topic, I would like the board to revisit the conversation that had occurred in late April, early May of this year about recording and posting committee meetings. This is where the meat and the discussions happen. If one cannot make it in person or cannot attend via Zoom, they're out of luck. So I would like to also see those recorded in an effort to bring more transparency to the district. Thank you.
Teresa Westwood, you may now make public comment. Please unmute yourself, state your full name and address.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Teresa Westwood, 70 Plymouth Drive, Royersford, PA. I want to echo some of the comments that were made by a couple of the other parents that went before me. Regarding Zoom, I agree. I have made it in person a few times when the agenda has warranted, but it's difficult when the meetings sometimes go 4 to 5 hours. And like some of the other parents, you have young children at home and you want to engage and participate. So I do appreciate the flexibility of having Zoom, and I do hope that you'll continue to offer that as an option for those of us that want to be engaged in what's going on with our school, our staff, and our children. The second thing I wanted to echo that other parents said is also the outdoor lunch, if that is an option. I am personally more than willing to pay extra money if that's something that we can accommodate, because lunch is something that makes me nervous. I do appreciate that we have the masking. I think that's helped a lot. I know we've seen, as I think it was Dr. Rizzo was talking about, some of the numbers have gone up. Hopefully that will quell and we'll see that go down, but having the extra spacing at lunch, I think will help. And the third thing I just wanted to say, to echo someone that went twice, I think 2 people before me, is I agree. I think sometimes as a board, and I do respect everyone's opinions, that we seem to swirl and revisit some of the same topics over and over again. They don't always seem to be fruitful. I hope that we can continue to focus on the agenda items that are most important and most at hand, and leave personal opinions aside and really just try to make the decisions and have the discussions that are warranted during this time. Thank you.
At this time, there were no other hands raised.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Meeting adjourned.